Hello, thanks for checking out the MeshMaker package. To open the program, go to the window menu item here, hover over MeshMaker, and you can open the program main menu here, or you can open the programs individually by clicking on their links here. When you open the main menu, it pops up in the bottom left corner here, and you can access the programs by clicking on the buttons here. The first one is Geom for creating 2D and 3-dimensional models, Mesh Editor for editing the vertices and faces, triangles of the meshes, 3D Brush for adding prefabs quickly to the scene using the brushes that you create here. Mesh Tools is a collection of 11 utilities all in the one package. Mesh Painter is a utility for painting directly on the meshes in the scene view. ISO Surface creates new meshes using mathematical formulas very quickly. Blenderizer changes the way the camera behaves in the scene view. Boolean ops is used to carve meshes with other meshes. Metaballs will create new organic looking shapes. Sculptor allows you to create meshes very quickly by designing them with the shape of the spline. And Mesh Cutter allows you to cut very quickly parts of meshes and save them to a prefab that you can then reuse in your scenes. I'll now cover how these programs work in a little more detail. With Geom here, you start with a basic shape, which is called a framework, and you can double click to place it anywhere in the world. And let's say we wanted to create a planter. We start with a square object, and we would scale that, and then we would add a grid which will be positioned 1 unit higher than the last grid, and we can scale that and also move the grid up and down. Now if we set the Y increment to 0 and add a grid, it will be positioned at the same height, where we can then scale it smaller, and then we can add one more grid, move it down, and give it a quick scale. And we've got a quick planter there, which we'll build. We might come back to Geom later in the video, but that's roughly how you would create objects using Geom. With Mesh Editor we can now switch to edit mode and right click to select the vertices. We can also extrude, which I'll do with a new game object here. Go into edit mode, switch to face selection, hold down shift, and it'll extrude. Like so. With 3D Brush we can quickly paint to our scene, or we can select a single brush, a single prefab. With the shape here, if I select the shape, let's make that a square. And we'll just scale that. Select the prefab we want. Let's say we want this prefab. We'll just select that one. and it'll only paint within that square. You can also customize the shapes by dragging the points, changing them to a curve. You can insert points to create custom shapes that you can then paint to. You can also use the shapes to exclude painting. To undo, we'll just hit Control Z. I'll just give a quick overview of mesh tools, as you're probably familiar with most of these features. You can clone meshes, as well as change the rotation and scale of each cloned mesh. You can move and rotate the pivot points of an object just quickly. See that I've already moved it here. We can move it back, hit apply. Got uniform scaling here. It's really just a time saving measure. You can select 2 axis and change its scale. Snap to grid, choose X, it will snap to that position, and you can invert the mesh, which turns it inside out. And to show you the next one, just come over to this model, and we can flip it in the X-axis, or the Z, and the Y. You can also split mesh. And transform textures. And how this works is you select your model, hold down the left Alt, click to select the triangles you want to transform the textures for. You can translate them in one direction, or the vertical. You can also rotate them and scale them as well. You can also get real scale, which will take an object and scale it without changing its world scale. You can use a double-sided mesh, which I'll actually come back to later. And also save mesh, so if you've created a mesh, you can save it in your project. With Mesh Painter, you can paint on simple objects, like this wall. Hold down Control, begin painting. But I wouldn't attempt to paint on anything complicated like this car or this house. I'd certainly save you work before you do that, which is why the program is free on the Asset Store. It just overlays, it doesn't actually change the textures of the mesh, so we can clear them very quickly just by doing that. With IsoSurface, you can quickly create geometric shapes using mathematical formulas. You've got a few pre-made ones here, and simply click Build. We have our new object, and you can have some more interesting ones, like this one here. Give it a new name and click Build to get some interesting shapes to work with. With Blenderizer, you can snap to objects by right-clicking on them, hold down the middle mouse button, to rotate as you would in Blender. As you switch objects, it'll snap to that object and rotate around it. You can also control the navigate using the arrow keys and change the speed of the scroll wheel, and the number pad keys work exactly as they do in Blender. And you can also minimize it so it's not in the way. With ball-in ops, you can quickly make holes again in simple objects. I wouldn't try this with anything too complicated, which is also why it's free on the asset store. And so we select an object here, make that the target, and the cutting brush. Click operate. You'll see that it's made a hole in the wall. And again, you can do this a few times, but the more you do it, the more broken up the mesh becomes, and it quickly might lead to an error. Definitely save your work before using this one. With metaballs, you can quickly create organic shapes. Just by adding or deleting more of the metaballs. When you've got a shape you like, so, you just click build. Just move the framework out the way. Got your new shape. Sculptor allows you to create new shapes by moving the spline around. So we wanted a shape like that. We'll just give it a new name and click build. You can also, as with many of the tools, which I haven't covered all the build options here, but you can choose to turn off smooth normals. Click build. And end up with a faceted look to the final object. This is Mesh Cutter, which is the latest tool, and this allows us to quickly lock onto an object. You don't have to hold down a control key, you just paint, and when we're happy with what we've got, we can also set the pivot point. So I'll move that in that direction, and we choose cut. We've now got our cut mesh, and if I just rotate that up, I'll just go back to mesh tools as well, because I meant to show you the double-sided mesh. This is a good time to do it. So we click on the car body here and we choose double-sided. Now we have an interior, but we need to do the bonnet as well. we go. So we've now got a double-sided mesh with a working bonnet. Mesh cutter's very powerful if you've got a large mesh, let's say like this house, and you wanted to cut out part or delete or create a submesh. In this case we're going to cut again. You notice that it's preserving the textures in the submeshes. I didn't update the pivot point, but it works on very large meshes and it's very quick. I'd certainly recommend it over the split mesh works, but it's not as fast and as powerful as Mesh Cutter. Same with Mesh Editor, which is going to have a full upgrade. I'm looking forward to making Mesh Editor a lot more powerful, a lot more stable in the future. Thanks again for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you got a lot out of it, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.